Well, how about that? Welcome in to the Flagship podcast recap of Texas's 35-10 loss at Georgia between the hedges. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by my main man, my brother from another mother, Eric Henry. Eric, we are looking out over Sanford Stadium as I don't know, they're picking up confetti or something, whatever that noise is you hear. Maybe they're picking up the souls of the Texas Longhorns after getting outscored 21-0 in the fourth quarter, Eric, and it started with an onside kick, a brilliant ambush by Kirby Smart after a 6-minute plus touchdown drive that included 2 fourth-down conversions by the Bulldogs, including Colin Simmons jumping off sides on 4th and 5, leading to a coverage bust on a 30-yard touchdown pass from Gunnar Stockton to London Humphreys. What does Kirby Smart do? He recovers Georgia's first onside kick since 2013, Eric. And Georgia rides the momentum of that onside kick to a 21-0 fourth quarter that Steve Sarkisian said, for lack of a better term, a disaster. Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, Chip, as you mentioned, we are here in the elements. So you're hearing the sound of whatever that is they are doing to the field here. But what you probably can't hear is a siren, and that siren is most likely the police escort taking the Texas Longhorns to the airport to head back to Austin, Texas. And they head back to Austin, Texas, having to lick their wounds, Chip, and quite frankly, having to assess, in my opinion, where they go from here. Steve Sarkisian, when we spoke to him post-game, he was asked, hey, how do you prevent this from snowballing? And he was adamant that this is not going to snowball, that this team has too much pride, too much character in themselves, and all the players said the same as well, echoed that sentiment, to let this snowball. However, there is no denying, Chip, this is a disappointing loss. Chip, this is the largest margin of defeat in the Steve Sarkisian era. The previous largest margin of defeat was a 30-7 loss at Iowa State in 2021. The 35-10 loss now represents the largest margin of defeat. 2 of the largest margins of defeat during Steve Sarkisian's tenure have come at the hands of the Georgia Bulldogs. Of course, Texas lost 30-15 in the regular season meeting last year. I reference that because, Chip, for all of the things that Texas wants to accomplish, Chip, all of the questions, is Texas back, right? How many times do we do radio spots and we get the question, is Texas back? Well, quite frankly, Texas has to overcome their Georgia problem in order to not just be back, because being back isn't the goal. What the goal is to compete for SEC titles and to make college football playoff appearances. They've done those two things. They've made the college football playoff twice. But in order to get to where they want to be, which is the upper echelon in the SEC, we saw it here tonight. There's a notch above that Georgia just quite frankly is at. Is that Kirby Smart out coaching Steve Sarkisian? That's left to be debated, right? But what we saw out here on the field, the onside kick, Texas not being able to take advantage of opportunities. Steve Sarkisian said it was a 14-10 game, and then it was a disaster of a fourth quarter. I respect that answer. However, I will point to the four consecutive drives, for Texas's offense, where their defense, after giving up 2 touchdowns, let's acknowledge that, right? Texas defense gave up 2 touchdowns to open the game. They handed him a punt, and then, of course, Anthony Hill has the interception, which Texas almost looked like they were only going to walk away with 3 points on that drive after the drive started at the Georgia 37. And then, of course, they get bailed out by the pass interference, and then Arch Manning hits Ryan Wingo. That, to me, Chip, is the precursor for, quote-unquote, the disastrous fourth quarter. You can look at the fourth quarter and say, hey, that's where the game went off the rails, but you have to acknowledge the 3 quarters prior and Texas's offense not being able to put points on the board and having to settle for 3 early on.
Well, let's be real. Arch Manning was failed by his pass droppers. They weren't even pass catchers because, he got off to a nice start, and then they drive all the way down. It's a double-digit play drive. Ryan Wingo drops a third down pass. They have to settle for a field goal. They go up 3-0, and then it just turned into a series of mishaps. You had, I think on the next possession, you had, the 3 drops. You had drop by Jordan Washington, by Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore. And then, at that point, Arch Manning started to hold the ball a little too long. And meanwhile, Eric, they were running the ball effectively with Quintravian Wisner. On the first drive, Quintravian Wisner was averaging 6 yards a carry. He only got 9 carries in the game. And I'm totally befuddled by that because you were getting what you wanted from your ground game. And then all of a sudden it turned into pass. And then they had a 3rd and 2 where they throw a tight end screen behind the line of scrimmage that Georgia easily, smokes, totally fleshes it out, drops it for a 2-yard loss, and Texas has to punt. It just felt like Steve Sarkisian was never in rhythm, never comfortable. So you have to give credit to Kirby Smart for that. But there were a lot of opportunities early on in that game when Arch Manning was comfortable and in rhythm, and his playmakers were dropping the football. And unfortunately, by the time, Arch Manning needed to start making plays, he started to second guess things. He was holding the ball too long, and when there were open guys, and he took a terrible sack in the second quarter when he had Quintravian Wisner wide open in the middle of the field, and then he throws a terrible interception. His mechanics were terrible, and this thing started to get away. But I say that, and Anthony Hill comes up with the interception. They're only down 14-10 going into the fourth quarter, Eric. So despite all of the offensive ineptitude in the first half, there they were with a chance, only trailing 14-10 going in to the fourth quarter. And we can't, we have to mention the 9 penalties that Texas was flagged for tonight. That gives Texas 28 penalties for 193 yards in the 3 losses to Georgia, including the 2 losses last year, Eric. That's just that's defining Texas right now when it comes to their matchups with Georgia. They're sloppy, they're inefficient. They fight, but tonight, Gunnar Stockton, 83% completion rate. He was fantastic, 24 of 29. And we talked about how he was completing 80% in the fourth quarter coming into this game. Tonight, he was 100% in the fourth quarter, 4 of 4 with 2 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. So, your thoughts on the sloppiness and the inefficiency, especially in the first half.
Chip, you talk about the inefficiency in the first half, and I'll come to that in a second. I'm just going to read 2 numbers off to you. 9 penalties for, I believe, 58 yards, 1 penalty for 15 yards. When you talk about coming in here and trying to beat Georgia on the road, I reference it as one of my 5 pressing questions entering this game. Texas's ability to not commit penalties, but especially on offense, Chip. That's why, if you're a Texas fan, and let's remove Texas fan just for a second. If you watch this game, if you cover this game, you have to look at this and feel like one team is a notch above the other. Those things, Chip, go into preparedness to play the game, preparedness to play football. Steve Sarkisian said he felt like his team had a good week of practice, right? And listen, Chip, have you ever heard a coach say, "Oh, we had a bad week"? Right? It's very rare that you get that level of candidness that we say, we had a bad week. This isn't the Miami Dolphins, right? Where Tua just says anything and everyone follows on, right? But it didn't show itself out here on the field. You have to stare that cold, hard truth in the face. Now, to your point about the inefficiency in the first half, again, I'm going to go back to what I talked about in terms of the drive chart for Texas. They got 4 punts. What did Texas do? 4 plays, 35 yards. 7 plays, 41 yards. 3 plays, -2 yards. 1 play, -9 yards. That can't happen if you're trying to beat this caliber of team. You talked about getting away from the run game. I'll kind of boost that point there. Quintravion Wires, and what did he finish with? 9 carries for 40-something yards, 41 yards, I believe.
9 carries for 37 yards, an average of 4.1 per carry.
I'll bolster that point, Chip. Trey had the carry for -8 yards, right? Where, he probably should have just gone down, taken the loss. It was a third quarter carry. The play was clearly stuffed. He tries to reverse field, ends up being a loss of -8. You take that off of his carry count, right? And he's probably averaging, 4.5, 4.6 yards. So maybe there was room to continue running the football. That's certainly against a Georgia defense that only allows about 100 yards per game on the ground. If you're having that type of success, maybe that can help stabilize things. But to your point, you can't have the type of drops that you have, right? The Wingo drop. It's debatable whether or not that would have been a first down, but at least you put yourself in position to try, maybe go for on 4th down if you haul in the pass. You have the DeAndre Moore drop, the Jordan Washington drop. It just looked like at a certain point, Texas, I heard, and I don't want to attribute it to the wrong player. I believe it was Michael Taft who said this, but Taft saying, it wasn't like we just got overwhelmed. Yeah, Chip, that wasn't Georgia's defense overwhelming Texas. That was Texas overwhelming itself. And you can't beat this type of team if you're going to have those types of errors and those types of miscues.
Yeah, Quintravion Wiser on the first drive had runs of 16, 3, 1, 4, and 6 yards. So that averages to well over 6 yards a carry. CJ Baxter also had a 4th and 2 run for 3 yards that converted, obviously extended the drive to the Mason Shipley 33-yard field goal after Ryan Wingo drops a 3rd and 8 pass. That is his third down drop in the last 3 games. He had 2 really costly 3rd down drops against Mississippi State, one on 3rd and goal that would have gone for a touchdown. And Eric, I know that Ryan Wingo came back and he ended up, making some big catches, including on 3rd down. He finished the game with 9 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. But those early drops are killing Texas. I don't know what to say. He does not feel like a wide receiver 1 to me. Emmett Mosley feels like a wide receiver 1 to me. And people are going to look at the numbers and say, what are you talking about? He had 9 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. He tripped a couple times. He got brought down by shoelace, ankle tackles. He's 6'2", 213 pounds. This is a guy who needs to be a dominant player if he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver in a Steve Sarkisian offense. He just doesn't feel like a wide receiver 1 to me. Your thoughts on that? Maybe I'm being too harsh, but that you can't let your team down like that.
Yeah, I'll address that real quick. I want to throw one of the comments up here from D-Man 54210. Says the majority of the offense did its job tonight. The receivers just didn't do theirs. Respectfully, I would disagree with that. The only reason I say that is because, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record. When you're in this type of game that Chip, the margins are going to be razor thin, and your defense hands you the ball 4 straight times off of punts, and you get nothing out of it, that's not doing your job. And I'll point to, again, the interception that Anthony Hill had. Texas was bailed out by the Zion, I don't want to get the kid's last name wrong, but the Georgia safety gets the DPI. They were almost having to settle for 3 there, right? So I respectfully disagree. Now, to your question about Ryan Wingo. Yeah, I do think there's a discussion to be had there. Here's the fact of the matter. I'll say this. I don't know if Emmett Mosley looks more like a wide receiver 1 than Ryan Wingo. I think this offense still is very much kind of receiver by committee, right? You would want DeAndre Moore to show up a little bit more, no pun intended, in moments. You would want a little bit more out of your tight ends, right? But I'll say this, Ryan Wingo, I'll take this on the chin. I wrote this in the offseason. I said that if Ryan Wingo had the number of targets that Ryan Williams or Jeremiah Smith had, he'd have similar production. That just isn't true right now, right? I'll point the finger at myself, say that is not true. Ryan Wingo is not performing like the 5-star talent he was billed at, or I shouldn't say billed as, rated as, coming out of high school. That is true. Is it semantics in terms of saying he's not a wide receiver one? Chip, I'll say this, and this is just my opinion. You can disagree. I think he's Texas's wide receiver one. I don't think this offense, when you look at it at the sum of all parts, I don't think, and maybe Chip, you would disagree. I'll just I will form it to you in the form of a question, or phrase it to you in the form of a question. I'll get that out. Sorry, it's late, and we got an hour and a half drive. If Emmett Mosley had 13 targets, the 13 targets that Ryan Wingo had tonight, do you believe this offense fares better?
I do. I think Emmett Mosley catches the 3rd and 8 pass on the first drive, and I think he catches one of those 3 drops on the second drive. Here's the problem, and you pointed out all the struggles, the drives that didn't, play complementary football to what the defense was doing to stop Georgia. Arch Manning changed. He was in rhythm. He was in the flow of the game to start the game. After the first drive, he was, I think, 5 of 6 passing. And then the one incompletion was Ryan Wingo. And then the next drive is 3 straight drops and a 3 and out. Then Arch Manning started to hold the ball longer, threw the interception. It was shaky, had to fight that off and then come back. And, they had the touchdown after the Anthill interception, but the offense was out of rhythm, out of sequence. It screwed up Sarkisian as a play caller. Those early drops are brutal, and late drop. All the drops are brutal, but third down drops are especially brutal. So, look, that was a moment in time, and then, they had a chance. It was 14-10 going into the fourth quarter. Kirby Smart totally outfoxes Steve Sarkisian with the onside kick. What a brilliant call. Goes up 11 and decides, we're going for the kill. And they pull off. Let me repeat this. They recovered an onside kick for the first time since 2013. Georgia recovered an onside kick tonight for the first time in 12 years. So this, after a fake punt in the SEC title game at a critical time, led to a 16-play drive that put Georgia up 16-13 in a game that Texas ended up tying and going into overtime with. But Kirby Smart, like you said, is one notch, one step, one beat ahead of Steve Sarkisian, who I thought lost his rhythm after brilliantly running the football on that first drive. He went away from the run, ended up throwing it 43 times and running it only 19 times. And that's over and out right there. I mean, total imbalance, Eric. What does Steve Sarkisian say all the time? We want to run the football. We want to run the football. Oh, sorry. He only ran it 17 times, threw it 43 times. Got totally out of balance. And, credit Kirby Smart, because he got Steve Sarkisian out of rhythm. And in that third quarter, Texas ran it only 4 times. They won the quarter 7-0, but they ran it 4 times for -7 yards, in part because Arch got sacked for 7 yards. But it just, I don't know. You got to give credit to Georgia. Texas, did nothing to shed the whole notion that Kirby Smart is, one step ahead of Steve Sarkisian, and that Texas has a Georgia problem. That's only going to get magnified because of that 21-0 fourth quarter. Do you agree?
No, I do agree, Chip, and I'll throw a couple comments here. Our super producer Taylor S has dropped a couple comments here in the chat. She noticed that Georgia had the ball for nearly 8 minutes more than Texas in the second half. only 3:42 in the fourth quarter. She also notes best defense, one is not on the field. Texas' defense on the field for 11 minutes and 18 seconds in the fourth quarter. You see the time of possession. Georgia had it for 35 minutes, 9 seconds. Texas had it 24 minutes, 51 seconds. That all goes back to not being able to have balance on offense. And I know we're going to get ready to close this one up, but Chip, you got to spin it forward. The tenor, the tone coming out of the locker room from Steve Sarkisian and everybody was there would be no hangover from this. There would be no carryover from this. Chip, do you agree? We know Texas is welcoming an Arkansas team that, quite frankly, is not very good to Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium on Saturday. That's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig, in a sense. If you go and take care of business against Arkansas, sure, you want to win, but it's this game against Georgia, and then you have Texas A&M coming in. Chip, in your perspective, as you already closed this one up, how crucial is it that Texas comes out and performs the way that you expect them to, because they got Texas A&M coming final week of the season?
Yeah, I mean, Steve Sarkisian's telling his guys, we got a 2-game season, and we need to, play our asses off, win those games, and see where we land with the College Football Playoff Committee. You and I both know, and what ESPN Analytics said, Texas's chances of getting into the College Football Playoff dropped to 28% with this loss tonight. So, look, Steve Sarkisian's got to keep his guys going because this is a killer. This is a killer. But, you gotta fight. You gotta, maybe a miracle happens. I don't know. But Texas needed their best performance tonight, and it was far from it. Very discouraging. There were some, good performances in here. Anthony Hill, Ty Anthony Smith led Texas in tackles. Alex January had a batted pass on third down. And, Quintravian Wisner, I thought, played well and thought he needed to be, they needed to dust off the Oklahoma game plan, and they were on their way to doing that. And then they just went straight to throwing the football. Eric, final thoughts from you, my friend, before we shut it down from Sanford Stadium.
Final thoughts for whatever this Texas program believes it is, and whoever this Texas program wants to be. There's still a ways to go to be Georgia. Simple as that.
Yeah, and on a night where Oklahoma goes to Alabama and wins, Oklahoma's college football playoff hopes are still alive, and Texas beat Oklahoma 23-6. That is now, lost in the fact that Texas suffered an untimely beating in Athens tonight. All right. For Eric Henry, I am Chip Brown. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Flagship Podcast recap of Texas's 35-10 loss to the Georgia Bulldogs. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Please like and subscribe to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, and stay safe and keep the faith.